"This is exactly why I can't wait for your father's money to finally come through," Olivia said, swirling her wine glass like she had just delivered a clever joke instead of something that made the entire table go silent. The room didn't react right away, not out loud at least, but I felt it in the way my mother's smile froze mid-breath and my younger brother suddenly found something very interesting on his plate. We were sitting around my parents' dining table, the same one my father had built with his own hands 20 years ago, solid oak, worn at the edges, but still standing strong, unlike the respect my wife had for the people sitting around it. Olivia leaned back in her chair, completely comfortable, completely unaware of the shift she had just created. "I mean, let's be honest," she continued, her voice light but sharp underneath, "once everything is settled, we're not exactly going to need these small family dinners anymore." She didn't even bother lowering her voice. That was the part that always stood out. It wasn't just that she disrespected them. It was that she did it openly, like she had already decided none of this mattered. I glanced at my father. He didn't say anything. He never did. He just nodded slowly like he was absorbing the moment, filing it away somewhere deeper than most people would notice. My mother forced a small laugh, the kind people use when they're trying to smooth over something that shouldn't have been said in the first place. "We like these dinners," she said gently. "They're important to us." Olivia smiled, but it wasn't warmth. It was patience, like she was humoring someone who didn't understand how the world really worked. "Of course," she replied. "I'm just saying, things change when you move up." Move up. That was her favorite phrase lately. As if life was some kind of ladder, and she had already decided who was worth standing on and who wasn't. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't correct her. I didn't defend my family. And that was exactly what she expected. Because over the past 3 years, she had learned something about me that wasn't entirely wrong. I didn't make scenes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue across dinner tables. Silence made people like Olivia comfortable. It let them believe they were in control. It let them think they had already won. What she didn't understand, what she had never bothered to understand, was that silence doesn't always mean agreement. Sometimes it means you're waiting. I reached for my glass, took a slow sip, and set it back down carefully, letting the moment stretch just long enough to settle into everyone else's memory. Because moments like this had a way of adding up. One comment becomes a pattern. A pattern becomes a record. And records, when the right people are listening, tend to matter more than opinions. Olivia went on talking, shifting the conversation like nothing had happened, already moving past the damage she had just done because, to her, it wasn't damage at all. It was progress. She believed that soon, very soon, everything would change. New house. New circle. New life. One where my family wouldn't fit anymore. And sitting there, watching her speak so confidently about a future she thought she understood, I realized something that settled over me with a kind of quiet clarity. She wasn't just underestimating my family. She was underestimating everything tied to them. Everything my father had built. Everything he had planned. And more importantly, everything he had already put in place long before Olivia ever sat at that table and decided she was above it. I didn't stop her. I didn't need to. Because every word she said that night, every subtle insult, every careless dismissal, it wasn't just echoing in that dining room. It was moving somewhere else. Somewhere she couldn't see. Somewhere she had never even thought to look. And by the time she realized what those words actually meant, it wouldn't be a conversation anymore. It would be a consequence. I met Olivia 5 years before that dinner, back when none of this felt complicated and everything still looked like a future worth building. She walked into a small networking event downtown, confident in a way that made people pay attention without her needing to ask for it. At the time, I was working long hours, saving what I could, trying to build something steady rather than flashy. She liked that about me at first, or at least she said she did. She told me I was grounded, that I was different from the men she usually met, men who talked big but never followed through. And for a while, I believed her. We started simple. Weekend coffee, late dinners after work, quiet nights that felt honest. She never complained about my schedule back then, never mentioned money, never compared me to anyone else. If anything, she made it seem like she appreciated the fact that I was not trying to impress her with things that did not last. When I introduced her to my family for the first time, my mother cooked for hours, preparing everything from scratch the way she always did when she wanted to make someone feel welcome. My father shook Olivia's hand firmly, looked her in the eye, and treated her with the same respect he gave everyone. My brother tried too hard to make jokes, but that was just who he was. It was not perfect, but it was real. And Olivia smiled through all of it. She complimented the food, thanked my parents, told me on the drive home that she liked how close we all were. She said it felt different from what she was used to. At the time, I thought that was a good thing. I thought she saw something valuable in it. Looking back now, I realize she was still deciding whether it fit into the life she imagined for herself. Things started to shift slowly, almost too subtle to notice at first. A comment here, a look there. The first time she made a remark about my family, it was quiet, almost casual. She said my parents lived too simply for people who had done as well as they had. I brushed it off. Everyone has different expectations, I told myself. The second time, it was a little sharper. She questioned why my father still handled certain things himself instead of hiring people. Said it felt unnecessary. I explained that he liked staying involved, that it was how he had always been. She nodded, but I could see the judgment already forming behind her eyes. Over time, those small comments became more frequent, more direct. She stopped filtering them, stopped pretending they were harmless observations. She would point out what she called inefficiencies, criticize traditions she did not understand, and occasionally laugh at things that were never meant to be jokes. And every time, I found a reason to let it go. Not because I agreed with her, but because I thought it was temporary. I thought once she felt more secure, more settled, she would stop needing to prove something that no one had asked her to prove. What I did not see back then was that it was never about adjustment. It was about perspective. Olivia did not see my family as something to become part of. She saw them as something she would eventually outgrow. And the closer she believed we were getting to that future, the less she cared about hiding it. By the time we got married, the pattern was already there, even if I had not fully admitted it to myself yet. She still smiled when she needed to. She still played the part when it mattered. But in private, and sometimes not even that private anymore, the way she talked about my family had already changed. And I kept telling myself it was something we would work through. Something we would fix. I did not realize that while I was trying to preserve what we had, she was already deciding what she was willing to leave behind. By the second year of our marriage, Olivia no longer waited for private moments to say what she thought about my family. It started showing up in small gatherings, then larger ones, then anywhere she felt comfortable enough to assume there would be no consequences. One Sunday afternoon, we were at my parents' house again, the same dining table, the same familiar setting that had never changed no matter what was happening in the outside world. My mother had spent most of the morning cooking, moving between the kitchen and the dining room with that quiet energy she always had, making sure everything was just right. Olivia arrived late, barely apologizing, setting her phone down on the table like the room had been waiting for her. She glanced at the food, then at my mother, and smiled politely, but I could already see the distance in her expression. "You really still cook like this every week?" she asked, her tone light but edged with something sharper. "That must take a lot of time." My mother nodded, smiling as if it was a compliment. "It keeps me busy," she said. Olivia tilted her head slightly. "I guess some people just get used to routine." It was subtle, but not subtle enough. My brother shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable, while my father kept his eyes on his plate, his silence steady but deliberate. I said nothing. I had started noticing something by then, something that made moments like this feel less random and more like part of a pattern. Olivia was not just speaking without thinking. She was choosing her words carefully, placing them where they would land without immediate confrontation but still leave an impact. And the more no one challenged her, the more confident she became. A few weeks later, at a small birthday gathering for my sister, it got worse. There were more people this time, extended family, a few close friends, the kind of setting where conversations overlapped and laughter usually filled the gaps. Olivia stood near the kitchen counter, talking to one of my cousins, when I overheard her say, I respect what they have built, but let's be honest, it is not exactly the kind of life anyone aims for long term. She did not lower her voice. She did not need to. She had already decided that no one there would push back. My cousin forced a smile, unsure how to respond, while Olivia continued like she was explaining something obvious. Once things shift, we will probably move somewhere that makes more sense for us. Closer to the kind of opportunities that actually matter. Opportunities. That word again. Always tied to something bigger, something better, something that placed her above where she currently was. I watched her from across the room, noticing how easily she moved through conversations, how naturally she dismissed the people who had welcomed her without question. And what stood out to me more than anything was not just what she said, but how certain she was that she could say it without consequence. That certainty did not come from nowhere. It came from belief. A belief that her future was already secured. That whatever was coming next would place her in a position where none of this would matter anymore. And slowly, without realizing it, she stopped pretending to value what she had never truly respected. Every dinner, every gathering, every passing comment added another layer to something that was becoming impossible to ignore. It was no longer just about differences in perspective or lifestyle. It was about control. About who she believed would have it when everything finally shifted in her favor. And the more she spoke, the clearer it became that she thought that moment was getting closer. It reached a point where Olivia stopped testing boundaries and started rewriting them entirely, and the moment that made that clear did not happen in private, it happened in front of everyone who mattered. It was my father's birthday, one of the few occasions each year where extended family made the effort to show up early and stay late, filling the house with voices, movement, and the kind of presence that had always defined what family meant to us. My mother had spent days preparing, organizing everything down to the smallest detail, making sure there was enough food, enough space, enough warmth for everyone to feel included. Olivia arrived dressed perfectly as always, composed, confident, stepping into the room like she belonged at the center of it rather than among it. At first, she played her role. She greeted people, smiled where expected, even complimented the decorations. But I had already seen enough to know that it would not last. It never did. The shift came halfway through the evening, when conversations started breaking into smaller groups and attention became less focused. That was when Olivia felt most comfortable. Less eyes, less pressure, more room to say exactly what she thought. I was standing near the back patio, talking with my uncle, when I heard her voice carry from the living room, clear enough that I did not need to move closer to understand what she was saying. I just do not understand why they hold on to all of this, she said, gesturing lightly around the room. It feels like everything is built on sentiment instead of strategy. There was a pause, the kind where people are not sure if they should respond or pretend they did. Not here. Olivia continued before anyone could decide. If you are going to build something valuable, you have to think bigger. Otherwise you just stay exactly where you started. My sister was in that room. So was my mother. And this time, there was no attempt to soften it, no effort to disguise what she meant. She was not just criticizing the house or the lifestyle. She was diminishing everything my father had spent his life creating. I watched from a distance, not stepping in, not interrupting, even as I saw the way my mother's expression changed, subtle but real, like something had finally landed where it could not be ignored. Olivia did not notice. Or if she did, she chose not to care. That was the difference now. Before, she had been careful. Now, she was convinced. Convinced that whatever future she had planned would make moments like this irrelevant. That once things moved forward, once the inheritance came through, once everything shifted into what she believed was its rightful place, none of these people, none of these traditions, none of this history would hold any weight. Later that night, after most guests had left and the house had quieted down, she made it even clearer. We were in the car, driving back, the road empty and the city light stretching ahead of us, when she said it without hesitation, without even looking at me. "We cannot keep living like this," she said. "Once everything is finalized, we need to start thinking about a different environment. Somewhere that actually reflects where we are going." I kept my eyes on the road. "And where exactly is that?" I asked. She shrugged slightly. "Somewhere better. Somewhere that makes sense for the kind of life we are about to have." About to have. She said it like it was already guaranteed. Like the outcome had already been decided. And in that moment, I understood something that had been building quietly for months. Olivia was not just planning a future. She was planning it without my family in it. Without the people who had stood behind everything she believed she was about to benefit from. And the more certain she became, the more openly she revealed it. What she did not understand, what she had never stopped to question, was whether that future actually belonged to her at all. That night stayed with me longer than I expected, not because of what Olivia said, but because of how easily she said it, like the outcome she imagined was already locked in and all that remained was waiting for the paperwork to catch up. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention, not to argue, not to confront, but to understand just how far she had gone in her own mind. It was not just the comments anymore. It was the way she moved through decisions, the assumptions she made about money that was not yet hers, the plans she started outlining as if they were already approved. One evening, she sat across from me at the kitchen counter, scrolling through listings on her tablet, her finger moving quickly across the screen as images of large homes and high-rise apartments flashed by. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward me. 5,000 square feet, private driveway, gated community. This is the kind of place that actually makes sense once everything settles. I glanced at the price, then back at her. "That is a big jump from where we are now," I said calmly. She smiled, not defensive, just confident. "That is the point," she replied. "We are not supposed to stay where we are." There was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty, just a steady belief that the transition she was describing was inevitable. I did not challenge her. Instead, I asked a different question. "And what about my family?" I said. "Where do they fit into all of that?" She paused for half a second, not because she did not have an answer, but because she was deciding how honest she wanted to be. Then she shrugged slightly. "They do not, Ethan. Not really. We can still see them, of course, but not like this. Not every week, not this close. That is not the kind of environment we are building." She said it so plainly that it almost sounded reasonable, like she was explaining a practical adjustment instead of removing people from a life they had always been part of. I nodded once, slowly, letting her finish. "You are talking about cutting them off," I said. She shook her head. "No, I am talking about evolving. There is a difference. Evolving. That word again, just like opportunity, just like moving up, always tied to something that required leaving something else behind. What she did not realize was that every conversation like this was doing something she could not see. It was creating a record, not written down, not stored anywhere physical, but still very real. I started remembering details more clearly, replaying specific phrases, noting the tone, the certainty, the repetition. It was not anger that pushed me to do that. It was clarity. Because the more she spoke, the more I understood that this was not temporary, not something that would fade with time or comfort. This was who she had decided to be. And more importantly, it was who she believed she had the right to be, based on something she thought was already guaranteed. A few days later, we attended another small gathering, this time at a friend's house, and the pattern continued without interruption. Olivia laughed when someone mentioned family obligations, casually dismissing them as something people eventually grow out of. At some point, she said, raising her glass slightly, you have to choose the life you want over the one you are used to. People around her nodded, some agreeing, some just following the conversation, but I noticed how easily she aligned herself with a future that excluded everything she had once stepped into. And the more she did it, the more certain she became that there would be no consequences. That belief was the part that mattered most. Because confidence like that does not come from nowhere. It comes from thinking you understand the full picture. From believing you know exactly where the power sits and how it will move when the time comes. Olivia thought she understood all of it. She thought she knew what was coming, what it meant, and who it would benefit. What she did not know, what she had never questioned, was whether she had actually been part of that plan to begin with. The first time I realized my father had anticipated something like this was not during one of Olivia's comments, and it was not during any of the family dinners where tension quietly built under the surface. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, weeks before that last birthday gathering, in a place that felt completely removed from everything Olivia thought she understood. My father's attorney had asked me to stop by his office, nothing urgent, just a routine matter, or at least that was how it was presented. The building itself was exactly what you would expect from someone who had managed our family's legal affairs for decades. Quiet, understated, efficient. No unnecessary displays, no attempts to impress, just a space designed for decisions that mattered more than appearances. I remember sitting across from him, watching as he opened a folder that had not been part of any previous discussion. He did not rush. He never did. Your father believed in planning beyond the obvious, he said, his tone measured, almost neutral. Especially when it came to protecting what he built. At the time, I did not fully understand what he meant. I assumed it was about tax structures, asset distribution, the usual things people expect when inheritance is discussed. But then he slid a document across the desk, one that was clearly separate from the rest, marked differently, handled more carefully. There are provisions, he continued, that were designed to address situations where external influence could disrupt the stability of the family. External influence. That was the phrase he used. It sounded clinical, almost detached, but the meaning behind it was anything but. I leaned forward slightly, reading through the lines, noticing how specific the language was, how deliberate every clause appeared to be. It was not just about who received what. It was about conditions. About behavior. About alignment with the values my father had spent his entire life reinforcing. These terms, the attorney said, are not widely disclosed. They are only explained to individuals directly affected by them when necessary. I looked up at him. And I am being told now because? I asked. He held my gaze for a moment before answering. Because you are in a position where understanding them matters. That was all he said. No elaboration, no assumptions, just a statement that left more space than answers. I did not ask more questions. I did not need to. The document spoke clearly enough. Certain actions, certain patterns of behavior, certain attempts to undermine or divide the family structure, they were not ignored. They were accounted for. And more importantly, they carried consequences that could not be reversed once triggered. I left that office with a quiet awareness that stayed with me long after the conversation ended. At the time, it felt distant, theoretical, something that might never actually come into play. But as the weeks passed, as Olivia's words became sharper, more consistent, more certain, that awareness started to shift. It stopped feeling like a possibility and started feeling like a direction. Not something I was pushing toward, but something she was moving into on her own. Every comment she made, every plan she outlined, every assumption she voiced about a future she believed was guaranteed, it all began to align with something I had already seen in writing. Something she had never seen at all. And the more confident she became, the clearer it was that she was not just speaking freely. She was walking straight into something she did not even know existed. The call came on a Tuesday morning, quiet and unremarkable, the kind of day that does not feel like it is about to change anything until it does. The attorney's office had scheduled a formal reading, not just for me, but for the entire family. It was time. That was all the message said. No details, no hints, just a date, a time, and an address I already knew by memory. When I told Olivia, she did not hesitate for even a second. Finally, she said, setting her phone down with a small, satisfied smile. I was wondering how long they were going to drag this out. There was no curiosity in her voice, no sense of reflection, just anticipation, like she had been waiting for a delayed reward she already believed she had earned. Over the next few days, I watched her shift in subtle ways. She spent more time researching properties, comparing locations, calculating numbers out loud as if the outcome was already sitting in her account. She talked about renovations, investments, travel plans, all framed as decisions rather than possibilities. And every time she spoke about it, there was one consistent detail. My family was never part of those conversations. Not even as an afterthought. The morning of the reading, she dressed carefully, more formal than usual, like she was preparing for something important, something public. She chose a tailored outfit, understated but expensive, the kind of look that signals confidence without needing to explain it. When she looked at herself in the mirror, there was a small nod, almost like confirmation. This is going to be a long day, she said, picking up her bag. But it is worth it. I did not respond. I did not need to. The drive to the office was quiet, not tense, just filled with two very different expectations moving in the same direction. She spent part of it checking emails, part of it scrolling through listings again, occasionally pointing out something she liked, something she thought would fit our next phase. I listened without interrupting, letting her build that future out loud, piece by piece. When we arrived, the building looked exactly the same as it always had. Nothing about it suggested the kind of shift Olivia believed was about to happen. Inside, the atmosphere was calm, almost neutral, like every other meeting that had taken place there before. My parents were already there, sitting side by side, my mother with her hands folded neatly in her lap, my father steady as always, his expression unreadable but grounded. My brother stood near the window, glancing over as we walked in, giving a small nod that carried more meaning than words. Olivia greeted them politely, her tone controlled, respectful on the surface, but I could see it in the way she positioned herself, slightly apart, slightly elevated, like she was already stepping into a different role. The attorney entered a few minutes later, carrying a set of documents, organized, precise, everything in its place. He greeted everyone, then took his seat at the head of the table, placing the folder down carefully before opening it. The room settled into silence, the kind that does not feel heavy until you realize how much is about to be said inside it. Olivia leaned back slightly, crossing her legs, her posture relaxed, confident, as if she already knew how this would unfold. She glanced at me briefly, a small smile forming, not warm, not shared, just certain. That certainty was the only thing in the room that did not belong there. Because while she was waiting for confirmation of a future she believed was already hers, what she did not realize was that everything she had been saying, everything she had been doing, had already been accounted for long before this moment ever arrived. And in a few minutes, for the first time, she was going to hear something she had never prepared for. The attorney did not rush into it, which only made the silence stretch longer than anyone in that room expected. He began with the formalities, the standard language that usually comes first in situations like this, outlining the structure, confirming identities, establishing the legal ground before moving into anything that carried real weight. Olivia remained relaxed through all of it, occasionally glancing at her phone, then back up again, her posture unchanged, her confidence intact. To her, this was just a process, a necessary step before everything shifted in her favor. Then the tone changed. It was subtle, almost easy to miss if you were not paying attention, but I had heard it before, in that same office, weeks earlier. The attorney reached a section of the document and paused, just long enough to make it clear that what came next was not routine. There are additional provisions, he said, his voice steady, controlled, that were established to ensure the long-term stability and integrity of the family structure. Olivia looked up at that, not concerned, just mildly curious, like it was a detail that would not affect her. The attorney continued, reading carefully, each word placed exactly where it needed to be. These provisions include conditions related to conduct, alignment with family values, and the preservation of familial relationships. I saw the moment her attention sharpened, not because she understood yet, but because something about the phrasing did not fit. The outcome she had already decided was coming. He went on, explaining how certain actions, repeated patterns of behavior, and demonstrated intent to undermine or diminish the family could result in disqualification from any benefits associated with the estate. The room remained still, no one interrupting, no one reacting, just listening. Olivia shifted slightly in her seat, her expression tightening, just enough to show that something was not aligning the way she expected. In such cases, the attorney continued, the individual in question would be considered ineligible to receive any distribution, direct or indirect, from the estate. That was when she spoke. I am sorry, she said, a small laugh slipping into her voice, but who exactly is that supposed to apply to? It was not defensive. It was dismissive. Like the idea itself was too far removed from her reality to take seriously. The attorney did not look at her right away. Instead, he turned a page, scanning the document briefly before continuing. Specific instances have been noted, he said, including repeated verbal statements made in family settings that reflect a clear intention to distance, diminish, or exclude immediate family members from future plans tied to the estate. The air in the room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that everyone felt it. Olivia's expression changed, not fully, not yet, but the certainty began to crack. Comments regarding the irrelevance of family gatherings, the intention to sever close relationships, and the dismissal of foundational values have been documented, the attorney added. This time, he looked directly at her. Not confrontational, not emotional, just precise. Based on these conditions, and the evidence of consistent behavior aligning with those conditions, the determination has been made that you are not eligible for any inheritance or associated benefits. The silence that followed was not confusion. It was recognition. Olivia did not respond immediately. She blinked once, then again, her posture no longer relaxed, her hand tightening slightly around the armrest of her chair. That does not make sense, she said finally, her voice lower. Now, controlled but strained. You cannot just decide that based on interpretation. The attorney did not react to the challenge. The terms were established prior to your involvement, he said. And the criteria for disqualification are clearly defined within the document. For the first time since I had known her, Olivia did not have a response ready. She looked at me, not for confirmation, but for something else, something she had not needed before. Understanding. But there was nothing to explain. Everything she had said, every assumption she had made, every plan she had outlined as if it was already guaranteed, it had all led to this exact moment. And now, sitting in that room, surrounded by the very people she had already decided she would outgrow, she was hearing something she had never prepared for. Not a delay. Not a complication. A complete removal from the future she thought was already hers. Olivia's reaction did not come all at once, it unfolded in pieces, each one slower than the last, like her mind was trying to catch up to something it had never even considered possible. At first, she tried to hold on to composure, straightening her posture, smoothing her expression, as if control alone could rewrite what had just been said. There has to be some kind of misunderstanding, she said, her voice measured, careful, but no longer confident. You are taking comments out of context. The attorney did not argue. He did not need to. The terms account for context, he replied simply. And for consistency over time. That word, consistency, seemed to land heavier than the rest. Because it was not about one moment. It was about all of them. Every dinner, Every comment, every quiet dismissal she thought would disappear as soon as something better came along. Olivia looked around the room then, not dramatically, just quickly, as if expecting someone to step in, to correct it, to confirm that this was not real. My mother sat still, her hands folded, her expression calm but distant. My father remained exactly as he had been the entire time, steady, composed, as if this outcome had never been in question. My brother avoided her gaze completely. There was no one left to reinterpret what had already been decided. "Ethan," she said, turning to me, her voice softer now, searching for something it had never needed before. "You knew about this?" It was not an accusation. It was disbelief. I met her eyes for a moment, not cold, not emotional, just clear. "I knew there were terms," I said. That was all. Because anything more would have sounded like justification, and none was needed. The truth had already been stated in a way that did not require explanation. She leaned back slightly, the weight of the moment settling in, not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. The confidence that had followed her into that room was gone, replaced by something quieter, something uncertain. Not panic. Not yet. Just the realization that the future she had been building in her mind had never actually been available to her. The attorney closed the folder with a soft, deliberate motion, signaling the end of the discussion without needing to say it. There was nothing left to add. No negotiation. No adjustment. Just a final outcome that had been determined long before any of us sat down in that room. I stood up slowly, the chair moving slightly against the floor, the only sound that broke the stillness. No one stopped me. No one needed to. Olivia did not say anything else. She remained seated, her eyes fixed somewhere between the table and the documents, as if looking directly at them might change what they meant. It did not. I walked toward the door, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving forward in a way that felt inevitable. As I reached the hallway, I paused for a brief moment, not to look back, but to let everything settle into place. For years, she had spoken as if she was already beyond this family, already stepping into something greater, something that made everything behind her irrelevant. She thought she was preparing to leave it all behind. What she never realized was that the moment she decided